We've all had a lot of questions about COVID. Where did it come from? How did it get here? Where did it start? And for a long time, this has been something that you have not been allowed to even talk about. But now that we're sort of over the hump, we have vaccines rolling out. Congress people, really in our Senate, in our House of Representatives, they're starting to look backwards. They want to say, maybe it's worth an investigation. It's worth further inquiry to determine really what happened, because it happened so quickly. The government was just responding. We had national lockdowns. We had all these different mandates, stay-at-home orders, and it was such chaos that we didn't really have a good debrief about what started this all. And so people are starting to ask those questions. And since we're not talking about COVID specifically, we're not talking about the disease itself, in other words, about what it does to you medically speaking, we're not talking about any medical component of it at all. I think it's safe that we can ask the same questions. We can look backwards and see what the government is asking. In particular, today, we had Dr. Rand Paul, who was also in Congress today with Dr. Anthony Fauci, asking him questions in particular about the birth of the coronavirus. Where did this come from? And so I have a deep dive that I want to do on this topic, because I went through this article that was written by a guy named Wade. I'm going to show you a little bit about here in a second. I did a very deep dive on it, but I want to go through and give you a summation of this from another blogger who summarizes this for us very nicely. His name is Allah Pundit, and he's over at Hot Air. And he said, Rand Paul clashes with Fauci. Didn't your agency fund gain-of-function research in connection with the Wuhan Virology Institute? Rand Paul asks Dr. Fauci. So I want to go through this. He says, look, if you're coming to this fresh, you'll be lost. And he's right. He says, if you watch Tucker Carlson talk about it last night, you'll be better prepared. And if you read this magisterial analysis by science writer Nicholas Wade a few days ago, you'll be really prepared. So 2 things on this. We're going to show you Tucker Carlson. He did a full segment about this last night. And I actually have a couple gripes with the segment, because I watched some of it and I think he was a little bit off. I think he was sort of jumping the gun on going after Fauci, right? And I think he was sort of trying to make a connection where there wasn't one that has been proven yet. It looks like there is a strong connection there, but it just hasn't been proven yet. So I think Tucker was just a little bit ahead of himself, but it's still a very good analysis, and he's bringing up some good questions. So we've got Tucker Carlson, and then we have this Nicholas Wade, who wrote a separate article, which is very, very in-depth. If you go on his Substack and read it, I would really encourage you to do it. But it's a long article. It is 45 minutes long if you read it. And it is something that I spent a lot of the weekend actually reading and dissecting, because I followed all of the links into all of the different tributaries of information. And it is a rabbit hole, let me tell you. So I'm going to give you a quick synopsis of what I found, but I also want to just sort of put this all in context. What we're talking about is this bigger idea about where the coronavirus originated. Did it come from a bat? Did it come from a wet market? Was this something that was naturally evolving? Or did this come from a lab based off of some gain-of-function research that was being done sort of in semi-public, clandestine operations? The whole thing is just sort of mired in government bureaucracy and secrecy and shrouded in different layers of, incompetence. And so we're all trying to unravel that. What happened here? Because we don't want this to happen again. Nobody wants to go through this again. So if human beings caused it, wouldn't it be a good idea to figure that out and to then unwind that, sort of peel the layers back so that we can figure out the source, so that we can know not to do it again? That's really what my interest here is. And so what's happening now is Congress is asking questions. Rand Paul is asking questions. Different government officials are trying to dive into this. And Allah Pundit at Hot Air summarizes it for us best. He says, I'll sum it up as best I can. The NIH, which is the National Institute for Health, or Health, NIH, which is Fauci's agency is a part of, has given grants in the past to a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance, which hunts emerging viruses. Okay, so we have the NIH, we have EcoHealth Alliance, and they hunt emerging viruses. And one of the places they do that is in China. And so literally there's a team of people in China that they go to different remote parts of China and they gather specimens. They gather bats and, guano and all sorts of things and bring them back to labs, try to identify new viruses, or viri or whatever, so that they can create vaccines and so they can study them in order to treat them. So they say of the 3.7 million that EcoHealth received from the NIH before 2019, 76,000 per year was given to, the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So about 80 grand a year given to them for their research on bat viruses. So or I'm going to show you in the next slide sort of a connection diagram. But here it says, while apparently it's true that the Wuhan lab didn't receive money directly from the NIH, some of NIH's money ended up in their coffers via the EcoHealth Alliance as the middleman. So you've got a lot of these moving parts. And if you read the entire Nathaniel Wade article, you're going to see a lot of it. It's a lot, right? It's an undertaking. So when I was reading through it, I broke it down into these separate parts. And I want to run you through kind of what's happening here. So as we all know, we have Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci is somebody that has been seared into our images over the last 12 months. Well, he has an organization that is somehow connected to the NIH, which is a national agency, right? Here, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, turning discovery into health. And so they have a relationship, some sort of an agreement working together. Then the NIH funds the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases to study allergies and infectious diseases. Well, what do? They fund those grants to a different company called EcoHealth Alliance, which is run by this guy called Dr. Daszak, which is somebody that Tucker talks about, also in the Nathaniel Wade article, who is the person who drafted the Lancet article, which is all part of sort of this kind of a public relations arm, which I'll talk about in a different video. But he funds this, which then goes out and has different media connections, does these different interviews, promulgating the idea that the coronavirus was natural, that it did not come from a lab. And so he's got this little propaganda arm that's kind of doing all of this in conjunction with all of these other agencies to cover for the fact that what was really happening is that Dr. Daszak used the funds that came over from NIH through the NIAID back down to EcoHealth through Dr. Daszak down to Dr. Shi, the Bat Lady. The Bat Lady now was actually in Wuhan doing these experiments and actually going out there and doing these gain of function, research maneuvers. So all of this now was sort of, covered up allegedly by the World Health Organization. That was also sort of in the back pocket of China and Wuhan. And so the question then becomes, what level of involvement was Dr. Fauci? What was he doing? Because he's the person who's sort of the U.S. side of this entire chain, and people are asking questions about it. The Nathaniel Wade argument goes through these 4 different factors in his article, talking about where did it come from? Was it natural or did it originate in a lab? And so he goes through the place of origin. He goes through the natural evolution of the virus. He goes through the furin cleavage site. He goes into the codons that are on the actual RNA of the virus, right? And so there's a lot in that article, some heavy lifting, but if you want to read into it, you'll see what his conclusion is, and it's pretty unequivocal. Now, we go back to the Allah Pundit article, and he says, the head of EcoHealth has spoken on the record before about Wuhan scientists tinkering with the genome of bat viruses they harvest. The point of tinkering, in theory, is that by making the viruses more infectious to humans in the lab, scientists can see how viruses might mutate into something dangerous out in the wild. Then they can start producing therapies and vaccines to treat them now before they cause the pandemic. They're trying to get ahead of the natural evolution in a laboratory setting to anticipate how it might progress in order to suppress it. The problem of tinkering is that you're creating precisely the sort of virus that could cause a pandemic. That's what he says. So they're trying to get ahead of it. They're doing all of these experimentations to try to make a really bad virus so that they can combat it. So that if they have a virus that's in a little petri dish in their lab, they can start working on vaccines and therapeutics that will combat the virus. Well, what happens then if that petri dish escapes? Well, we just live through it. Theoretically, potentially. People are asking questions. Nobody knows about this yet because there really isn't evidence. Dr. Shi, the Bat Lady, who I just referenced in the prior slide, then teamed up with Ralph Barrick, an eminent coronavirus researcher at the University of North Carolina. Their work focused on enhancing the ability of the bat viruses to attack humans so as to, quote, examine the emergence potential. In pursuit of the same, in 2015, they created a novel virus by taking the backbone of SARS-1, replacing its spike protein with one from a bat virus known as SHC04-CoV. This manufactured virus was able to infect the cells of the human airway, at least when tested against a lab culture of such cells. The virus is known as a chimera. Its genome contains genetic material, and this goes on and on and on. So what the concept here is that Fauci is somehow involved in this. And Pundit wraps up his argument. He says, there's no smoking gun here. We don't know if SARS-CoV-2 escaped from a lab. We don't know if the NIH money was instrumental in its gain-of-function research. We don't know if Fauci approved the funding of or if EcoHealth Alliance violated the terms of the grant. But Fauci seems to have no good answers in this exchange with Paul, apart from insisting that the NIH never funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology. No one's saying they did, though. The allegation is that they funded EcoHealth Alliance, and EcoHealth then redirected the money to Wuhan to fund gain of function, which may or may not have produced and accidentally released the virus that causes COVID, right? It's an important question. Okay, nobody's directly making accusations yet, but people are asking questions. And currently, Fauci's responses have not been all that good. Now, Tucker Carlson was out there last night saying, more specifically, why isn't there a criminal investigation into Fauci's role in the pandemic? Monday, Tucker said that the possibility that the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases director, Anthony Fauci, he's the director over there, how about that, had a role in research that could have led to the spread of COVID. He asked whether it warranted a criminal investigation. Carlson offered a theory that the coronavirus originated from the Wuhan Institute, and Fauci had signed off on funding of the gain-of-function research on viruses like COVID-19. So I've got a quick clip from Tucker from last night. It was a long segment. I think it was about 10 minutes long. So I encourage you to go watch the whole thing. There's a little segment here where he's referencing the Nathaniel Wade article, which is, again, is very good. Really encourage you to read that if you're interested in it. It's a long one and some heavy lifting in there, but well worth it. But in that article, the way I read it, is Wade was being actually sort of deferential to Fauci. He didn't write the article saying Fauci's responsible for this through the connection, through the NIH, or through the Allergy and Infectious Diseases Organization. He basically says that Fauci was just kind of a good spokesperson, just a good foot soldier, and that he's not really responsible for it. So, take it for what it's worth. Now, here Tucker Carlson comes in and then sort of characterizes that differently, saying that this article was written essentially to incriminate Dr. Fauci, and I did not read it that way at all. That being said, still some very important questions are being asked, because if, as I've been saying, if this was human caused, if we are responsible for this in some way, shape, or form, we need to know that. And we need to get to the root of that so that we don't do it again. And if we just sort of bury our heads in the sand and just say, well, no, it came from a bat out of a wet market, let's move on. Let's just forget about it. Nobody asked questions. Nobody talked to the Chinese. Nobody wants to anger them. They own half the country anyways. We want to make sure that we get to the bottom of this so that it does not happen again. Here's Tucker from last night.
Monday, how do we assess the Biden administration's response to COVID? Well, here's one marker. It tells you pretty much everything that the White House, that is supposedly so committed to science, chose.
All right, so for some reason,
even cannot recommend more strongly a new piece by Nicholas Wade, who for more than 50 years has been one of the preeminent science writers in the world. For 30 years, Nicholas Wade worked for the New York Times. He edited the science section there, but this piece did not run in the New York Times. It ran on Medium. And the piece explains where this virus almost certainly came from. In it, Nicholas Wade makes it clear that more than any other single living American, Tony Fauci is responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. Wade lays out a nearly insurmountably large amount of evidence that this virus originated at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in central China. It seemed to make sense. This show and others had raised the possibility from the early days of the pandemic. But this piece all but proves it. At the time the outbreak began last fall, the Wuhan lab was conducting experiments on how to make bat viruses infectious to human beings. Those experiments were funded by American tax dollars. Those experiments were, their funding, approved and directed by Tony Fauci in Washington.
All right. So again, I think it's a little bit much there. Now, if you read the article, then yes, you can sort of reverse engineer that. You can take that back. You can walk that back from the virus is wrecking the world, back to Wuhan, back to the NIAID, back to the NIH, back to Tony Fauci. You can certainly make that logical leap, but I just haven't seen the evidence there yet. And we now know that Dr. Fauci is also under question, right? I mean, we have him testifying in Congress today. We have Dr. Rand Paul, who was there. Actually, hang on one second. We have a little bit of a technical difficulty, so I'm going to open up a different slide. And we'll be able to get the questions. Now, for some reason, I don't know if anybody can help me with this, but we use PowerPoint and we sync up on multiple computers. So I work at my home office, I work in my office, I work here in the studio. Faith works on the same PowerPoint file, but sometimes it just won't sync up. It'll be the exact file that I want in my office, but then when I come here in the studio, it doesn't sync. And it looks like it's syncing, and then it just disappears. So it is quite frustrating, I will tell you that. But let me reopen this and then get over to the next clip so that I can play this, because these are some good clips. This came over from Rand Paul today, who was in Congress discussing things with Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
Senator Paul, with all due respect, you are entirely and completely incorrect that the NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute
Do they fund
of Virology.
Dr. Barrick?
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrick's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina.
You don't think inserting
China.
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain of function?
That is
You would
not
be in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain of function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain of function, despite the fact that people tweet that.
So
they
do
write
you still
about it.
support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan
Do you
Virology
support
Institute.
sending money? We did under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support that the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been infected.
Or perhaps it would be
in China.
irresponsible to send it to the Chinese government that we may not be able to trust with this knowledge and with this incredibly dangerous viruses. Government scientists like yourself who favor gain-of-function research.
I don't favor gain-of-function research in China. You are saying things that are not correct.
All right, so you're going to see they are going to be mincing words over this stuff for a very long time. And what I mean by that is you're going to see just different conversations about what certain words mean. What does gain of function mean? Well, no, I mean, we just heard two different interpretations of it. Rand Paul says you support gain of function. He says, no, I don't. And well, what does that, what does that mean? What different clinical mechanisms or procedures or, lab experiments are gain of function and what are not? And are there differing degrees of this? Is there a gray area where it's kind of gain of function, or is it only gain of function when, the virus grows arms and does cartwheels? At that point in time, well, that was a successful gain of function analysis. I don't know what the standards are. And there's probably many different degrees of this, just like we see in criminal law. We've got all these different degrees of use of force and all of these, there's a lot of gray area in this. And a lot of these bureaucrats, of course, are going to hide right in the middle of that. And it's going to be difficult for us to sort of dissect what exactly is going on. Then we also have another clip over here where they're wrapping up.
You in front of this group categorically say that the COVID-19 could not have occurred through serial passage in a laboratory?
I do not have any accounting of what the Chinese may have done, and I'm fully in favor of any further investigation of what went on in China. However, I will repeat again, the NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
You support it in the U.S. We have 11 labs doing it, and you have allowed it here. We have a committee to do it, but the committee has granted every exemption. You're You're fooling with Mother Nature here. You're allowing superviruses to be created with a 15% mortality. It's very dangerous. I think it was a huge mistake to share this with China, and it's a huge mistake to allow this to continue in the United States. And we should be very careful to investigate where this virus came from.
I fully agree that you should investigate where the virus came from. But again, we have not funded gain-of-function research on this virus in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, no matter how many times you say it.
There was research. There was research done with Dr. Shi and Dr. Barrick. They have collaborated on gain-of-function research where they enhanced the SARS virus to infect human airway cells, and they did it by merging a new spike protein on it. That is gain-of-function. That was joint research between the Wuhan Institute and Dr. Barrick. You can't deny it.
Senator Paul, your time.
Yeah, so it's one of two things. Either they're going to be mincing words over what gain of function means, or as you heard him say there, nope, the NIH did not fund any gain of function research in the Wuhan Virology Institute. Okay, and very clearly. All right, so, but you did fund Eco Alliance, right? And Dr. Danzig, right? And they funded Dr. Shi, Bat Lady, in Wuhan, in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right? So we know that you didn't just go from point A to point Z, but we know that you were the person, allegedly, according to Rand Paul, that you connected the dots. You funded the original research with Eco Health Alliance that then funded the litany of other endeavors down the line. So it's once again, it's politicians just sort of being politicians. Now, if you think that Dr. Fauci is not a politician at this point, okay, I disagree with that. All right, let's go into some questions. First one comes from Chascal, who says, looks like you're using Windows and not Mac OS. That's probably the first problem, that we're on Windows. We have Seen and Unseen says, is it just me, or does this demonstrate that the dangers of what happens when a pipeline isn't available? Yet Biden still gets praised for immediately shutting one down in his first days. And I think that's accurate. And there was the energy secretary, I think today, was in front of the press corps answering this question specifically. They said, hey, if the pipeline's down, how else are you going to get fuel around to everybody else? What else are you going to do? You're going to put it on a boat? She said, yeah, actually, we're going to look at deep port entries. We're going to try to maneuver them around to different ports around the coast. We're going to be putting them on trucks. We're going to be doing everything that we can. But a pipeline is the best. A pipeline is really the best way to do it. It's kind of the easiest and quickest. And she said that, and the RNC research team is like, see, we've been telling you that for a long time. Why don't you reopen Keystone while we're at it? Don't hold your breath on that. We have Woodworking Medic says, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but just seems suspicious that the infrastructure plan was introduced and it's basically the Green New Deal. Now we have another pipeline shut down after the Keystone. Seems fishy, but that's just me. Liberty or Death says, White House was asked today what the probability of using rail cars would be to ship the gas. White House said the pipeline was the best way to transport the fuel. Cool, huh? But I thought the Keystone XL pipeline was bad. Yeah, exactly right. Pipelines are good for transporting liquid and gaseous fuels, but they're not. Apparently they're not green, though. Norovirus says, this is all crisis generation by the Biden administration. There will be multiple reports where, yes, there is a shortage. No, there is no shortage. Main goal is to panic people. New panic now that COVID is over. Once gas is restored, there will be a surplus as the pipeline is not working at 100% capacity, like 75% or so. And yeah, I've seen that actually. And that makes sense to me. That they would sort of operate at about 70% capacity with the ability to ramp it up. And I think in these types of industries, that's kind of what you want. In case that there is an emergency, you ramp that sucker up. And you don't want to be redlining. You don't always want to be at 100%. Sort of like when you're burning fat. You don't want to be sprinting all the time because you'll wear your body out. Just a nice little jog, right? Get the blood flowing. That's what you want. Just like the blood of oil running through our infrastructure. Next up, we have Jeremy Matrita says, I've spent some time learning about the latest viruses. They're pretty impressive. They usually start with a very well-crafted phishing email, which the user falls for. He's talking about not the coronavirus. He's talking about software virus. The code is also sophisticated, gets around antivirus by using a lot of random steps in the code that slowly pieces itself together, gaining administrative rights, then disabling critical system processes that basically tell the antivirus, this is not the code you're looking for. So it's sort of like a Jedi Knight virus. Thank you for that, Jeremy. We got Liberty says, question, none of the Kung Flu vaccines are FDA approved yet. Our school is likely going to mandate a vaccine in order to come back to campus. Do you think that is legal? I remember your stance on being required to take it to appear in court. Just curious. Oh, gosh, I don't even know, Liberty. That's a good question. What is the legality of that? I think that this is going to be a constitutional issue. I mean, I think the Supreme Court will ultimately have to sort of deal with this. We're going to have all sorts of mandates, and there are going to be objections to it. I mean, what if the school says, yeah, you got to take this vaccine to come back, and you say, well, I have a religious objection to that? Which one of those things wins? And there's all sorts of federal legislation on, equal anti-discrimination. That's not my area of law, so for me to opine on it is outside of my hula hoop for sure. But I don't like the idea that you have to be mandated to put something into your body in order to participate in regular life. But I know there's a lot of people who disagree with that. We have _shade says viruses have patents, which is marking businesses' stocks. There's a trail over 20 years old. They have been manipulating viruses also worldwide, not just China. CDC and the NIH has a lot to answer to. It's a game. They're all covering for each other, just like everything else. We've got Jeremy says, social network analysis is fascinating and the useful tool in connecting people to organizations and events. I'm sure it was used to connect the dots on Dr. Fauci and the Blovid virus. We've got Nadarb says, just so you and everyone else knows, Alex Jones said this a year ago. Just saying. Maybe he isn't as crazy as they make him out to be. Good to see you, Nadarb. We got Liberty in the house says, this all sounds like a video game coming to life. Isn't there a game where there was a virus that a corporation was messing around with and it got out and created death and destruction? I hope everyone has their zombie hunting equipment. Faith, time to kit up, girl. Strap up, Faith. So, this reminds me of a book I read. There's a Dan Brown book out there. Can't remember the name of it. Dan Brown's the guy who wrote the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons and Inception Point. I've read most of his stuff. I think it's one of his newer books where there's a virus. Maybe it's one of the older ones. It might have been Inception Point. I think it might have been Inception Point, where he's talking about there is a virus. This is all fictional. There's a virus that actually sort of gets out into the world, and Robert Langdon and whoever the girl is in the novel, they have to go and stop this virus from getting out. And it's this, a mysterious race against time in Dan Brown fashion. I love his novels. They're sort of like guilty pleasure, but they're fun. And they're trying to race against time to stop this virus from getting out. Nobody knows what this virus does, but there's this mastermind person that has this AI system and all this stuff. So virus gets out. They come upon the scene where the virus was going to be released into the city's water supply, and they get there and the virus is already out. It's already been out. Probably already been out for months, maybe years. And what is it? It's one of these viruses that sort of go into your body and inject some sort of, it modifies your genome essentially, and it makes a certain segment of the population infertile. And it's doing this because the AI system has sort of calculated that human population, we're sort of in this ticking time bomb where eventually there's going to be too many people on the planet, and we're sort of going to kill ourselves. So the AI, in conjunction with this evil mastermind, create this virus that they release, and it infects the whole world, but nobody knows about it. It just goes in there and kind of turns off your reproductive rights, your ability to reproduce, and it's only for a third of the world. And the AI calculated that this was going to whittle back down the human, reproductive numbers in a way that's not going to wreck the planet. Which was a fictional book. That's a little too close to home, isn't it? We have Leafy Bug in the house says, the Chinese are claiming the COVID-19 virus originated from a cave 1,000 miles away from Wuhan. The alternative explanation is a leak from a lab. The Chinese explanation is not impossible, but the latter seems more likely. It's a great summation of it, Leafy Bug, and that's really where I stand on this whole thing. It's like, listen, we don't know. That's the whole point. We don't know. Chinese say it's natural. We know how much we can trust sort of the biggest adversary to the United States in the world. Not much. So maybe it's worth asking some other questions. And if our government had a hand in this, and if we're funding gain of function research, maybe the American people want to have a say on that. Maybe there's a conversation to be had around that policy decision. We have NY Renal MD in the house says, during the Obama admin, gain of function was shut down due to concerns. Seems people went around it by diverting funds from other areas. There were safety concerns at the Wuhan lab. There was no way to know without an investigation. And yes, we saw that. I think I talked about this Actually, I'm not sure I talked about it on this channel because we really haven't spoken much about the COVID stuff. But there was another article that was, I think it was in the Nathaniel Wade article, where he specifically talks about that there was a lot of problems in 2016, 17, and 18, where basically that they're saying these labs are different scalability, they're different levels of safety. So you have like safety level 4, 3, 2, and 1, and you're only supposed to do gain of function research at a level 4 lab. Well, Wuhan was like a level 2 lab. So why were they doing that type of intense research at a level 2 lab that didn't have the requirements, the safety protocols that are necessary that would be associated with a level 4 lab? And so they were beating their fist about it. This was a problem, has been a problem for some time. Anki Wo says there was a Chinese report about 5 years ago covering how to use coronaviruses as a bioweapon, detailing best conditions under which to release it. Chinese began working on a COVID vaccine January 6, 2 weeks before they admitted it, hid it while they secretly tried to get a head start on the vaccine. I did see those headlines around. I think I bookmarked something on Twitter that there is a sort of a leaked Chinese military document that is talking about viruses as weapons. Scary world. Very, very scary stuff. We got E. Dantes in the house, says one of the major issues in our political and governmental system is there is no accountability. They have these hearings, accusations are made and refuted, but nothing ever really gets solved. The opposing party will rally around that person and give them cover. No one is ever accountable. Comes from examples, Lois Lerner, Fauci, et cetera, et cetera. Totally agree with you, Edon Test. Totally agree with you. And I think that it is so important that we just keep the pressure. Just keep talking about this stuff, because the more we discuss it, I think the more sunlight we are able to shine down upon it, and that is a good thing. All right, so great questions. Thank you for those.